We are witnessing a subtle but significant sociological shift, a quiet exodus that operates beneath the radar of mainstream discourse. It is not a movement with manifestos or leaders, but a silent, collective sigh of resignation. The most psychologically developed, spiritually awake, and consciously integrated individuals are gradually, deliberately, and without fanfare, withdrawing from the central structures of modern society. This is not a retreat born of misanthropy or failure. It is a strategic withdrawal, a necessary uncoupling from a system with which they can no longer ethically, psychologically, or energetically align. Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist, not only predicted this phenomenon but framed it as an inevitable and essential stage in the process of individuation, the journey toward psychological wholeness. He termed it the necessary withdrawal, a point where an individual's expanding consciousness makes participation in the collective unconsciousness not merely frustrating, but physically and psychologically painful. This essay will expand on why this disappearance is happening, arguing from a Jungian perspective that it is not a pathological escape but a healthy, adaptive response to a world asleep. We will explore the mechanics of the collective unconscious, the death of the persona, the unbearable burden of sight, the unsustainable energetic cost of consciousness, the archetypal necessity of the hermit phase, and the potential for a transformed return. The foundation, society as a theater of collective unconsciousness. To understand the exodus, we must first understand the stage being exited. Jung proposed that beyond our personal unconscious lies a collective unconscious, a deep layer of the psyche shared by all humanity, containing universal patterns and instincts known as archetypes. However, society largely operates on a more superficial, yet equally powerful, layer, the collective consciousness, the sum of agreed-upon beliefs, norms, prejudices, and values of a culture. When a society is largely unself-aware, this collective consciousness devolves into a state of collective unconsciousness. It runs on autopilot, fueled by shared delusions, unquestioned beliefs about success, progress, and normality. Mass projections, the unconscious act of disowning our own undesirable qualities, our shadow, and attributing them to external groups, the other political party, a different race, a rival nation. Agreed-upon shadows, societal sins we collectively ignore or justify for the sake of comfort and continuity. These are not bugs in the system, they are the system's core programming. The machinery of society, its commerce, its politics, its media, depends on widespread, unconscious participation. It requires individuals to identify with their assigned roles and not ask fundamental questions. The awakened individual becomes a glitch in this matrix. Having undertaken the difficult work of confronting their own personal unconscious, integrating their shadow, acknowledging their complexes, they gain a piercing clarity. They can see the projections, recognize the delusions, and understand the games being played. As Jung experienced, ordinary social interaction becomes a strange pantomime. It is the experience of being awake in a room full of people talking in their sleep, and being constantly asked to pretend you are asleep too. The effort to constantly translate one's conscious understanding into the limited language of the unconscious collective becomes a source of profound isolation and exhaustion. 2. The internal catalyst, the death of the persona and the birth of the self. Before awakening, we navigate society through a persona, the Latin word for mask. This is the social face we present to the world, the competent professional, the dutiful parent, the agreeable friend. A well-functioning persona is necessary for social cohesion. The problem arises when we identify with the mask, mistaking it for our entire being. The journey of individuation involves breaking this identification. Through self-reflection, dream analysis, and confronting the shadow, one makes contact with the self, with a capital S, the central archetype of wholeness, the true, indivisible core of the personality that encompasses both the conscious and unconscious mind. Once an individual has truly touched this authentic self, the persona becomes a prison. Returning to the performance required by society feels like a form of psychological death. The awakened person can no longer smile when they feel sorrowful to maintain harmony. Espouse opinions they see through to belong to a group. Chase status symbols they recognize as empty. This is not a rejection of others, but a commitment to authenticity. They have become too real for environments that demand falseness. The withdrawal, then, is not antisocial, but pro-authentic. It is the logical consequence of finding oneself in a world that asks you to be someone you are not. 3. The unbearable burden, shadow sight and energetic sensitivity. As one integrates their personal shadow, a profound and often painful shift occurs, the collective shadow becomes glaringly visible. When you have honestly faced your own capacity for darkness, jealousy, or pettiness, you can no longer tolerate the societal spectacle of mass projection. Watching political debates, for example, ceases to be a battle of ideas and becomes a tragicomedy of two groups violently projecting their own unconscious material onto each other, each convinced of their own righteousness. Social media transforms into a 24/7 shadow projection machine, a digital coliseum where unconscious anxieties and hatreds are unleashed. For the conscious individual, this is not just an intellectual observation, it is an energetic assault. Increased consciousness often brings heightened sensitivity. Being in a crowd, or scrolling through a news feed, can feel like being subjected to a chaotic storm of unconscious emotion, anger, fear, desire, that others seem oblivious to. Jung noted that after his own profound awakening, being in large groups became almost unbearable because he could feel the swirling psychic turbulence. Participating in this system becomes impossible. You cannot choose a side in a conflict when you see that both sides are fundamentally acting out the same unconscious drama. The awakened withdraw not from a place of moral superiority, but from a place of psychological necessity. To participate would be to betray their own integrated wholeness. 4. The energetic economy, the unsustainable cost of consciousness. Maintaining a conscious perspective in an unconscious environment requires immense psychological energy. This invisible labor includes constant filtering, not reacting to the projections directed at you. Energetic boundary maintenance, preventing the absorption of the anxiety and negativity of others. Psychological translation, navigating the vast gap between depth perception and surface-level discourse. Frequency holding, maintaining one's own vibration amidst the static of collective unconsciousness. For the unconscious person, social life is energetically neutral or even charging, they are flowing with the current. For the conscious person, it is like swimming upstream against a powerful tide. This relentless expenditure leads to the classic symptoms of the awake individual in an asleep world: chronic fatigue, burnout, mysterious ailments, and a deep sense of depletion. Jung observed that for many of his most advanced patients, the cure was not more therapy, but a radical change of environment. Withdrawal, to nature, to solitude, to a like-minded community, was not an indulgence but a strategic conservation of a finite resource, consciousness itself. It is the decision to stop pouring the clear water of awareness into the sandy ground of collective unconsciousness. The archetypal pattern, the hermit phase as a psychological imperative. This withdrawal is not a random occurrence but a universal, archetypal process Jung called the hermit phase. This is a necessary, temporary stage in the individuation process, a period of incubation and integration. The hermit archetype represents the conscious, voluntary retreat from the collective for the purpose of inner work and spiritual maturation. It is a time to digest and integrate the insights gained from shadow work. Allow the authentic self to consolidate without the distorting pressure of social expectations. Listen to the inner voice, what Jung called the voice of the self, away from the noise of the world. Jung's own retreat to his tower at Bollingen was a literal enactment of this archetype. It was not an escape from responsibility, but a fulfillment of a deeper responsibility to his own psychological development. The individuals disappearing today are following this ancient pattern. They are not lost, they are in a phase of profound deepening, gestating a wisdom that could not be born in the busy marketplace. 6. The return, not to the center, but to the margins with a gift. The hermit phase is rarely permanent. The ultimate goal of the journey is not eternal isolation, but a return with a gift. However, the awakened individual does not return to the center of the collective unconsciousness they left. They cannot. That would require a de-evolution, a refragmentation of their hard-won wholeness. Instead, they return to the margins or the edges of society. They become what Jung called border dwellers. They may reappear as guides and therapists for those undergoing their own spiritual emergencies. Artists and writers who give form to the numinous and the deep. Builders of conscious communities and alternative living structures. Mentors who offer maps to others who feel the pull to withdraw. Their contribution is no less valuable for being quieter and more targeted. They create the pockets of consciousness that serve as way stations for the next wave of awakening souls. Their disappearance from the mainstream is, paradoxically, what allows them to build the foundations for a more conscious collective future. Conclusion: disappearance as an act of love and evolution. The great uncoupling of the awake from the asleep is not a societal breakdown, but a sign of societal evolution. It is a natural sorting process, driven by an innate psychological imperative toward wholeness. If you feel this pull to withdraw, to simplify, to disappear, it is crucial to reframe it. It is not a failure to cope, nor is it spiritual bypassing. It is the psyche's healthy immune response to a toxic level of unconsciousness. It is an archetypal call to honor the self over the persona, authenticity over approval, and depth over breadth. This withdrawal is ultimately an act of love, a love for truth, for consciousness, and for the potential of humanity. It is the recognition that to truly serve the collective, one must first cease to be enslaved by it. The disappeared are not abandoning the world, they are retreating to the inner workshop to forge the tools and maps that the world, in its future awakening, will desperately need. Their silence is not an absence, but a gestation. Their disappearance is not an end, but a necessary preparation for a more authentic beginning.